The Ottoman Empire collapsed between 1918 and 1922. Its territories were divided by European power. Borders were drawn by men who had never been there. Most accounts explain this through military defeat, the Ottoman armies, Gallipoli, the Arab Revolt. Those accounts are not wrong. They are incomplete. What they skip is this. The Ottoman Empire had already surrendered its financial sovereignty, not on a battlefield, but in a decree. 37 years before the empire collapsed militarily, it signed away the right to collect its own taxes. In October 1881, the Ottoman government signed the Muharrem Decree. Under this document, a European-controlled institution, the Duyun-u Umumiye, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, was given direct authority over 6 major sources of Ottoman government revenue, not advisory authority, operational authority. The institution would collect those revenues itself. The money would flow directly to European bondholders in Paris, London, and Amsterdam, bypassing the Ottoman Finance Ministry entirely. By 1910, this institution employed 9,000 people and collected revenues exceeding what the Ottoman Finance Ministry itself collected in the same year. A foreign body was running the Ottoman government's finances from inside the empire, 40 years before the empire finally collapsed. This is the story of how that happened, and why the mechanism it built looks very familiar today. It started with a war. It always starts with a war. In 1854, the Ottoman Empire entered the Crimean War alongside Britain and France. The war served British and French strategic interests, containing Russian expansion. The Ottomans fought on their own territory. When they ran short of money, they went to European financial markets for the first time. That first loan was £3 million, raised in London. The rate was high. Lending to an empire whose finances were opaque carried risk. The loan was repaid. The relationship continued. Through the 1850s and 1860s, the borrowing accelerated. Military modernization, telegraph line, railway, suppressing rebellions across Crete, Lebanon, and the Balkans. Every project required capital the empire did not have domestically. The creditors were primarily French. French banks held the largest block of Ottoman bonds. British investors were second. By 1875, total Ottoman foreign debt had reached approximately £200 million. Interest ran at 5 to 6% annually, structured disadvantage for a borrower with no alternatives and no legal recourse. In October 1875, the Ottoman Finance Minister announced a full suspension of interest payments on all foreign debt. Not a renegotiation, a suspension. French and British investors who had bought Ottoman bonds as stable income-generating securities received nothing. 5 years of negotiation followed. The Ottoman government had little leverage. It still owed £200 million. In October 1881, the settlement arrived. The Muharrem Decree established the Duyun-u Umumiye, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. Its council included representatives of British, French, German, Austro-Hungarian, Italian, and Dutch bondholders, plus 2 Ottoman members. In practice, European-controlled. 6 revenue streams were assigned directly to the institution: the tobacco monopoly, the salt monopoly, the silk tax, the spirits tax, the stamp duty, the fish tax from the Bosphorus and the Sea of Marmara. Not secondary revenues. Core, predictable income the Ottoman government had depended on for generations. The OPDA collected them first, before any Ottoman ministry touched the money. The remainder went to the government. If you already knew that a European institution was physically collecting Ottoman tax revenues, not advising, not auditing, but collecting, drop a pound in the comments, because this mechanism has a modern name. The IMF calls it structural adjustment. It is not a new idea. Here's what the standard account leaves out. The OPDA was not only a debt collection arrangement, it was a platform for further extraction. European powers understood it as such. The Governing Council gave each major creditor nation a legal position inside the Ottoman revenue system. That position could be used to negotiate additional concessions, and it was Deutsche Bank held a seat on the OPDA's council by virtue of German bondholder interests. It used that position and the leverage it gave over an Ottoman government desperate for creditor goodwill to secure the Baghdad railway concession. The concession, granted in 1903, gave Deutsche Bank and the German government the right to build a railway from Constantinople through Anatolia and Mesopotamia to Baghdad and the Persian Gulf, not just to build it, to own it, to operate it, to collect revenue along one of the most strategically sensitive corridors in the world. Britain saw a German railway to the Persian Gulf as a direct threat to British India and British oil access. France saw German commercial expansion into Ottoman lands as undercutting French financial primacy. The Baghdad Railway became one of the sharpest pre-1914 geopolitical flashpoints, hardening the alliance blocs that went to war in August 1914. A concession extracted through OPDA leverage contributed to the conditions that produced World War I. That connection does not appear in most accounts of the Duyun Umumiye. There is a second omission, the capitulations. Foreign nationals in the Ottoman Empire, Europeans and Americans, were exempt from Ottoman taxes, subject to consular courts, not Ottoman law. By 1900, a French merchant in Constantinople paid no Ottoman taxes and could not be tried in an Ottoman court. Ottoman merchants had none of these advantages. The empire held formal sovereignty. It had lost practical authority over the foreign nationals who controlled a growing share of its commerce. The result was a compound squeeze. The OPDA collected revenues from Ottoman subjects. Meanwhile, exempt foreign nationals conducting an increasing share of economic activity paid nothing into the Ottoman tax base. The base shrank as the debt service demand held firm. By 1911, debt service consumed 32% of the total Ottoman government budget, more than military spend, more than education and public health combined. The Ottoman government could not expand any public service without first satisfying its European creditors. Not a policy choice, the structure they had signed in 1881. The OPDA employed 9,000 staff by 1910. They collected revenues the Ottoman Finance Ministry could not touch until the OPDA had taken its share first. The Ottoman archives in Istanbul contain internal ministerial correspondence from this period, a government that understood exactly what had happened to its sovereignty, debated it, documented it, and had no legal mechanism to reverse it. This is what losing financial sovereignty looks like from the inside. Subscribe, because the next script covers the petrodollar system. In 1974, the United States negotiated a deal with Saudi Arabia that was never publicly announced. It replaced gold with oil as the anchor of the global reserve currency. It lasted 50 years. It is now showing its first cracks. The Duyun Umumiye was framed as rational debt restructuring, a reasonable settlement between a borrowing government and its creditors. Governments that default must accept oversight. That framing was not false, but it omitted something important. The Ottoman government did not default because it was reckless. It defaulted because it had been fighting wars that served the strategic interests of the powers it borrowed from. The Crimean War, which generated the first Ottoman loan in 1854, was fought primarily to contain Russia for British and French benefit. The Ottomans borrowed to fight Europe's war. Then they surrendered their tax revenues to repay the loan. European strategic interests drove Ottoman borrowing. European creditors structured that borrowing at high rates. When the debt became unserviceable, European institutions took direct control of Ottoman revenue collection. The human cost fell on people who had made none of these decisions. Ottoman tobacco farmers paid a production tax. After 1881, that tax went to the OPDA, controlled by investors in Paris, London, and Amsterdam. The farmers had no seat on the collection council. They paid. They had no alternative. Ottoman fishermen on the Bosphorus paid a fish tax to a council that answered to European bondholders. Ottoman salt producers worked under a monopoly now administered by a foreign institution. None of them had borrowed £200 million. None had participated in the 1875 default. All were now servicing it. And then there is World War I. The Ottoman decision to enter World War I on the German side was driven by multiple factors, but one factor appearing in Ottoman internal records was the prospect of escape. A German victory might dismantle the OPDA, restore financial sovereignty. The debt administration was not seen internally as a neutral creditor arrangement. It was seen as an instrument of domination. War offered a potential exit. The gamble failed. The Duyun Umumiye was wound up not because the mechanism was challenged, but because the state it had been imposed on ceased to exist. Let's step back and look at what we actually know. An empire borrowed to fight wars that served its creditors' strategic interests. The debt became unserviceable. A default produced a settlement, placing external creditors in direct operational control of government revenue streams. That body employed 9,000 people, consumed 32% of the government budget, and lasted 40 years until the state itself ceased to exist. I want to be precise here. This is an analysis of financial systems and institutional power, not an indictment of any group. ethnicity, or religion. The responsibility lies with specific institutions and the individuals who ran them. History does not need conspiracy theories to be disturbing. The documented record is disturbing enough. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration is the direct historical ancestor of IMF's Structural Adjustment Program. The mechanism is identical. A government in financial distress accepts external creditor oversight of specific revenue streams as a condition of restructuring. The creditor institution gains legal authority to monitor and direct those streams. The government retains formal sovereignty. It loses practical authority over its fiscal decisions. Greece, 2010 to 2018. The Troika, the European Commission, the ECB, and the IMF required Greece to commit airport revenues, port revenues, and government assets to external oversight. Peak Greek debt service consumed more than 30% of the government budget. The Ottoman figure in 1911 was 32%. Greece kept its parliament. It did not retain meaningful authority over the fiscal decisions that matter. Argentina, 2018. The IMF extended a $57 billion credit line, the largest in the institution's history. Conditions covered revenue collection, spending, and monetary policy. IMF staff reviewed Argentine accounts in real time. The finance ministry answered to its creditors before it answered to its voters. The language has changed. Structural adjustment, conditionality, fiscal consolidation. The vocabulary is modern. The mechanism? External creditors with legal authority over a sovereign government's revenues as a condition of access to capital has not changed since October 1881. The verdict on the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. European creditors, having lent money to a government fighting European wars, used a debt default to impose direct operational control over Ottoman tax revenues for 40 years, extracting repayment from a population that had not borrowed. The money, using institutional leverage to extract further commercial concessions, including the Baghdad Railway, and establishing the template that international financial institutions would later deploy on 3 continents under different names. Next, we are looking at the petrodollar system. In August 1971, Richard Nixon ended the dollar's link to gold. 3 years later, his Treasury Secretary flew to Riyadh and made a deal that was never publicly announced. Saudi Arabia would price oil in dollars. The United States would guarantee Saudi security. That arrangement governed global energy markets for 50 years. It is now showing its first cracks. If you made it this far, you already know more than most. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.